My name is Clara Holloway. I am 34 years old, and for the last decade, my world has been measured in shades of green. I am a landscape designer, a nurturer of quiet, growing things. My hands know the language of soil, the subtle thirst of a root system, the precise angle at which to prune a branch to encourage new life. I believed I understood the principles of growth, of patience, of weeding out what doesn't belong to allow the beautiful to flourish. I thought I had applied those same principles to my life, to my marriage. I was wrong. This is the story of how the garden I had so carefully tended was scorched to the ground, and how, in the ashes, I learned to cultivate something truer, something stronger, something entirely my own. It began, as so many endings do, with a silence that felt heavier than words. Liam, my husband, had become a ghost in our home, a beautiful, hollowed-out version of the man I married. The Sterling family, his family, had a name that glittered in our city of Port Blossom. They were builders, creators of sprawling, glass-walled homes that dotted the coastline under the banner of their company, Sterling Homes. I had been welcomed into their fold 8 years ago, a quiet, artsy girl who they saw as a charming, unthreatening addition to their dynasty. I designed the gardens for their properties, my name a small, tasteful footnote in their glossy brochures. I softened their hard edges with wisteria and rambling roses, and in turn, they gave me a life of polished comfort. It had seemed, for a long time, like a fair exchange. But the soil of our life together had grown thin and depleted. The easy laughter that once filled our house on Willow Creek Lane had been replaced by the sterile click of Liam's keyboard late into the night. He was working, always working, he said, protecting the family's legacy. His sister, Fiona, would pat my arm at family dinners, her smile as sharp and perfect as the crease in her tailored trousers. "You're so good for him, Clara. So grounding." His mother, Margaret, would watch me from across the expanse of their great dining room, her eyes holding a placid, unreadable judgment. His father, Arthur, was the quiet patriarch, a man who spoke in numbers and market projections, his approval a rare and precious commodity. I felt the chill long before the frost. It was in the way Liam would angle his phone away from me, the way he started locking his study door, the sudden business trips that left no itinerary. It was a faint, cloying scent of a perfume I didn't own that clung to his coat one evening, a scent as invasive and unwelcome as bindweed in a bed of peonies. The truth, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, digital wound. An email notification on his laptop, left open on the kitchen island. A hotel confirmation for a local boutique inn for 2 people for a weekend he had supposedly spent at a conference in another state. The other name on the reservation was Annabelle. I didn't know who she was, but the name itself felt like a stone in my stomach. For a full day, I did nothing. I walked through my garden, the one at our own home, my sanctuary. I touched the velvety leaves of the lamb's ear. I deadhead the spent cosmos, my fingers moving with an automatic grace, while my mind felt like a shattered pane of glass. The grief was a physical thing, a pressure behind my ribs that made it hard to breathe. I had given my heart, my creativity, my loyalty to this man, to this family. The thought of their smiling faces, their casual endearments, now felt like a gallery of exquisitely crafted lies. That night, watching Liam sleep, his face untroubled, I felt a shift. The initial shockwave of pain began to recede, and in its place, a cold, clear stillness settled over me. I was a gardener, and I knew what you did when a plant was irrevocably diseased. You didn't just weep over it. You assessed the damage, you salvaged what you could, and you prepared the soil for something new. You didn't let the rot spread to the healthy roots around it. My own roots, my sense of self, my future, they were still healthy. I would not let this blight destroy them. The next morning, while Liam was in the shower, I took a photograph of the email on his laptop. And then I made an appointment. Not with a marriage counselor, but with Elias Vance, a man whose name I'd found after hours of research. He was known in Port Blossom not for being aggressive, but for being meticulous, discreet, and unyieldingly thorough. His specialty was complex financial divorces. I had a feeling mine was about to become one. The 3 months that followed were the most difficult and transformative of my life. On the surface, I was the same Clara. I attended the Sterling family Sunday lunches, nodding along to Fiona's pronouncements about the property market. I discussed garden plans with Margaret, suggesting hardy perennials for their new coastal development. I smiled at Liam when he came home late, accepting his vague excuses about deadlines and investor meetings. But beneath that placid surface, a different Clara was taking root. Twice a week, I would drive to a quiet, unassuming office building downtown. Elias Vance's office was not what I expected. There were no mahogany desks or intimidating leather chairs. It was filled with light, overflowing bookshelves, and pots of healthy, thriving houseplants. Elias himself was a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a calming presence, but a mind that moved with the sharp precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Grief is a valid response, Clara," he told me during our first meeting after I'd laid out the story in a trembling voice. "Anger is too. But strategy is what will protect you. Let's focus on strategy." And so, my education began. He walked me through the tangled web of the Sterling family's finances. I learned about shell corporations, limited liability partnerships, and the ways assets could be moved and shielded. I, who had only ever balanced the budget for my small design business, was now tracing millions of dollars through a labyrinth of legal entities. It was daunting, but with each document Elias explained, a piece of my naivete fell away, replaced by a hard-won understanding. "They've been preparing for this," Elias said one afternoon, pointing to a series of transactions. "Over the last 6 months, Liam's ownership stake in 3 key properties has been transferred to a new trust. A trust that lists his mother and sister as the primary beneficiaries. And my name is nowhere on it," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Nowhere," he confirmed. "They're not just planning to divorce you, Clara. They're planning to leave you with next to nothing. They're positioning it to look like Liam's personal net worth is a fraction of what it truly is." The betrayal was deeper than just infidelity. It was a cold, calculated campaign to erase my contribution, to nullify our shared life. The gardens I designed, which had demonstrably increased the value and appeal of their properties, the years I'd spent supporting Liam, managing our home so he could focus on the business, the identity I had merged with theirs. They were trying to write it all off as a loss. Around the second month, I noticed the car. A nondescript gray sedan that seemed to appear in my rearview mirror on my way to the grocery store, and was parked down the street when I met my best friend, Maya, for coffee. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. But then I saw the driver, a man with a tired face and a baseball cap, pretending to read a newspaper outside the nursery where I was buying spring bulbs. My first instinct was fear, a hot flush of panic. They were watching me. Then, that same cold clarity I'd felt in my bedroom washed over me again. They were looking for something. An affair, a misstep, any excuse to paint me as the villain, to justify their own actions. Fiona's fingerprints were all over this tactic. It had her brand of ruthless efficiency. I told Elias. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, "if they want a show, let's give them one." His plan was simple, yet brilliant. He compiled a list of the top divorce attorneys in the state. Men and women with formidable reputations. "Have lunch with them," he advised. "Meet them for coffee. Be seen in public. Let their investigator take all the photos he wants. Let them build a case that is factually true, but contextually the opposite of what they think it is." And so I did. I sat across from James Peterson, a bulldog of a litigator, at a sun-drenched table at the Landing, Port Blossom's most popular waterfront restaurant. I let him talk, nodding, smiling, my head tilted in what could easily be mistaken for rapt attention. The camera I knew was watching from afar would capture a cozy, intimate scene. The following week, I had coffee with Eleanor Vance, no relation to Elias, a woman famous for dismantling fraudulent financial schemes. We sat at a sidewalk cafe, the conversation animated. Every gesture, every shared laugh, was a breadcrumb for their investigator, leading them down a path of their own making. My final meeting was with a silver-haired gentleman named Marcus Thorne, a legend in family law, known for his skill in uncovering hidden assets. I chose a quiet, elegant French bistro for our dinner. I wore a simple black dress. I knew this would be the final piece of their puzzle. In the midst of this strange, clandestine theater, I had to confront the other part of Liam's betrayal, Annabelle. My research, grimly conducted late at night, had revealed she was a junior marketing associate at Sterling Homes. Young, ambitious, beautiful. I could have hated her. In the beginning, I did. But as I pieced together the timeline, I saw that she had been hired just 7 months ago. She was likely as much a pawn in this as I was. I found her one evening, leaving the Sterling Homes office tower. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not part of Elias's plan. This was my own. "Annabelle," I said, my voice softer than I expected. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition and fear. "Clara." "Mrs. Sterling." "I'm not going to cause a scene," I said quickly. I just want to show you something. We went to a quiet park nearby, the cherry blossoms casting a pale pink glow in the twilight. I didn't accuse her. I didn't shame her. I simply laid out the facts. I showed her the timeline of Liam's asset transfers. I showed her emails I'd recovered from his computer's trash folder, discussions between him and Fiona about his transitional relationship, and how it would be cleanly resolved once the more complicated matter was settled. Her face, so full of youthful confidence, slowly crumbled as she read. She saw what I saw, that Liam wasn't building a future with her. He was using her as a bridge to get away from me, a bridge he fully intended to burn once he was safely on the other side. He told me you'd grown apart years ago, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. That the divorce would be simple, amicable. That he was just waiting for the right time to start our life together. He is a very convincing man, I said, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of pity for her. We were two different women, from two different worlds, caught in the same man's web of deceit. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice shaking. I don't want anything from you, I said gently. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. What you do with it is your own choice. I walked away, leaving her on the park bench under the falling blossoms. I didn't know if she would help me, but I had planted a seed of doubt. And sometimes, that is all it takes for the truth to grow. The summons came on a Thursday. A family dinner. Not the usual Sunday lunch, but a special, command performance gathering at the Sterling family estate, a grand old house overlooking the turbulent waters of the bay. The gardens there were my masterpiece, a four-season tapestry of color and texture that I had poured my soul into for 8 years. The irony was not lost on me. They were going to try to execute me in the very Eden I had created for them. I chose my armor carefully, a simple, elegant dress in a deep forest green, the color of resilience, of life. I felt a profound, almost surreal calm as I drove through the wrought iron gates. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was an observer, watching the final act of a play I already knew the ending to. They were all there, gathered in the formal living room. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth. Liam stood by the mantelpiece, refusing to meet my eyes. Margaret was perched on the edge of a brocade sofa, her hands clutching a porcelain teacup. Arthur stood by the window, his back to the room, a monolithic silhouette against the stormy sky. And Fiona, the orchestrator, stood in the center of the room, a sheathed sword of a woman. The fifth person in the room was a surprise. Annabelle. She sat in a chair slightly apart from the family, looking pale and small. So, they had brought her into the fold, ready to present her as Liam's future, my replacement. The final, humiliating blow. Clara, thank you for coming, Fiona said, her voice smooth as polished stone. She gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. I preferred to face them on my own 2 feet. The air was thick with a cloying, performative sorrow. Margaret finally looked at me, her expression a careful mask of disappointment. Clara, dear. We are so sorry it has come to this. To what, Margaret? I asked, my voice even. Fiona didn't wait for an answer. She stepped forward and slid a series of glossy photographs onto the polished surface of the coffee table. Snapshots of me, laughing with James Peterson at the landing. Leaning in to hear Eleanor Vance at the Sidewalk Cafe. Sharing a quiet dinner with Marcus Thorne. They were artfully captured, framed to imply intimacy and secrets. While Liam has been working himself to the bone to provide for you, to protect this family's future, Fiona began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, you, it seems, have been entertaining yourself with other men. She placed a proprietary hand on Liam's arm. He flinched almost imperceptibly. Annabelle watched him, her expression hardening. We were heartbroken to discover this, Fiona continued, her gaze sweeping the room, landing on me with theatrical weight. But in a way, it is a relief. It explains so much. And, of course, it makes the difficult road ahead much simpler. Liam doesn't have to feel guilty about Annabelle. And you can't possibly expect a significant settlement under the circumstances. In fact, we'd be within our rights to demand. I let her words hang in the air. I looked at the photos, at the careful, curated evidence of my supposed infidelity. They were good. The private investigator had earned his fee. They're lovely pictures, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the suddenly silent room. The composition is excellent. You must have paid a fortune for them. Fiona's triumphant smile wavered. This was not the tearful, broken reaction she had anticipated. Is that all you have to say? You don't deny it. Deny what? I asked, walking closer to the table. That I had meetings in public places? Why would I deny it? I wanted you to see. I reached into the leather tote bag I was carrying. They all tensed, as if expecting me to produce a weapon. Instead, I brought out a slim portfolio and placed it on the table next to their photographs. I tapped the first photo, the one of me and James Peterson. This is James Peterson. He's one of the most aggressive litigators in the state. I was interviewing him. I decided he was a bit too much of a shark for my taste. I moved to the next. This is Eleanor Vance. Her firm specializes in forensic accounting. She's particularly brilliant at finding assets that people try to make disappear. A flicker of unease crossed Arthur's face. He turned slowly from the window. I pointed to the final picture, the one from the elegant bistro. And this man is Marcus Thorne. He's a legend. His particular expertise is in cases where one party, with the help of their family, fraudulently transfers marital assets into trusts right before filing for divorce. The silence in the room was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Fiona's face was ashen. Liam looked from the photos to me, dawning comprehension warring with disbelief in his eyes. You see, I continued, my voice gaining strength, when I discovered Liam's affair with Annabelle 3 months ago, I decided that if my marriage was a casualty of the Sterling family business, then I should at least approach the dissolution with the same level of professionalism. I opened my portfolio. Inside were not photos, but documents. Bank statements. Property deeds. Incorporation papers for the new trusts. I had laid them out as clearly as a blueprint for a garden. You're lying, Fiona whispered, but the words had no conviction. Am I? I looked directly at Liam. Those papers your father had you sign 2 months ago, Liam. The ones he said were just routine estate planning. Did you read them? Did you understand that you were signing away your ownership of the Shoreline Villas project? That you were effectively giving away millions of dollars of marital property to your mother and sister? Liam's head snapped toward his father. Dad? Is that true? Arthur had the grace to look ashamed. Margaret, however, rushed to his defense. We were just protecting you, Liam. Protecting the family from a gold digger. Her voice faltered as my gaze met hers. The accusation, so potent moments ago, now sounded pathetic and shrill. Actually, Margaret, I said softly, the legal term for what you did is fraud. And my lawyer, my real lawyer, Elias Vance, a man you didn't photograph because he was smart enough to have me meet him in his firm's underground parking garage, has documented every single step. I turned the portfolio around for them to see. There, on the top page, was a detailed flowchart created by Eleanor Vance's team, tracing every dollar, every transfer, every signature. But that's not even the most interesting part, I added, my eyes finding Annabelle's. For the first time, Annabelle spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. You recorded them, didn't you? She said, looking at me. It wasn't a question. I gave a small sad nod. You left your phone on the table during your last conversation with Liam and Fiona. You told me you might. You said you wanted an insurance policy of your own. I looked at Liam. She was smarter than you gave her credit for. She knew you were planning to discard her, too, as soon as I was out of the picture. The room imploded. Liam stared at Annabelle, utterly betrayed. Fiona lunged toward her, screaming, "You little traitor." Arthur had to physically restrain her. Margaret burst into theatrical sobs. Through it all, I stood there, a strange sense of sorrow washing over me. There was no triumph in this, no joy. It was just a profound, heartbreaking mess of their own creation. I had not come here for revenge. I had come for the truth. I had come to reclaim myself from the story they had tried to write for me. I gathered my portfolio, my movements slow and deliberate. My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow morning, I said into the chaos. He'll be sending over a settlement proposal. It's not vindictive. It is simply my fair share of the life and the business I helped to build. I suggest you accept it. The alternative would be having all of this, I gestured to the documents, the photos, the weeping, screaming family, become a matter of public record. I don't think the Sterling Homes brand would survive the scandal. I walked to the door of the living room. On the threshold, I paused and looked back. The fire was dying in the hearth. The perfect family was in ruins. Liam was looking at me, his face a mask of shock and a strange, dawning respect. Clara, he said, his voice hoarse. When did you become so calculated? I thought of the long nights spent poring over documents, the fear that had spurred me on, the self-respect I had clawed back piece by piece. You can't neglect a garden and expect it to thrive, Liam, I said softly. It either dies, or it learns to grow wild and strong in order to survive. I turned and walked out of the house, out of their lives. I didn't look at the gardens on my way out. They were beautiful, but they belonged to the past. As I drove away from Willow Creek Lane for the last time, the sky broke open, and a gentle rain began to fall, washing the world clean. I didn't cry. I just drove toward the horizon, toward the empty, fertile ground of my own future. The 6 months that followed the dissolution of my marriage were like the slow, steady return of spring after a long, hard winter. The settlement, as predicted, was accepted without a fight. The Sterlings, faced with the ruin of their reputation, chose the path of quiet capitulation. They paid for their treachery not only in dollars, but in the currency they valued most, their pristine public image, which was now irrevocably tarnished within their own inner circle. I never spoke to Liam again. I heard through Maya that he and Annabelle had not, in fact, started their new life together. Their foundation, built on a shared deception, had crumbled under the weight of its own discovery. The last I heard, he was still working at Sterling Homes, but his authority was diminished, his confidence shattered. Fiona, stripped of her strategic power, had retreated into a bitter silence. My own life, however, began to blossom. With my share of the settlement, I bought a small cottage on the other side of Port Blossom, one with a wild, overgrown garden that was crying out for a loving hand. It had a view of the ocean and a small studio space with a skylight. I named my new landscape design firm New Bloom Designs. It felt right. The work was my therapy. Plunging my hands into the rich, dark earth, sketching out plans for new life, I felt myself healing. I wasn't just designing gardens for clients, I was rebuilding my own. I tore out the thorny, invasive species of self-doubt and planted beds of self-reliance. I cultivated patience, trusting that the seeds I was sowing, in my business and in my life, would grow in their own time. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was pruning the climbing roses that framed my cottage door, a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, the handwriting elegant and familiar. It was from Margaret Sterling. My first instinct was to throw it, unopened, into the compost bin. But curiosity, a gentler, less wounded version of it, won out. I sat on my porch swing, the scent of salt and late-blooming jasmine in the air, and opened it. "My dearest Clara," it began. "I do not write to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it. I write because silence feels like a continuation of the lie we all lived for so long. There is no excuse for what we did, for the cruelty and the calculation. We were driven by fear of losing control, fear of what we didn't understand. You were always kinder and more genuine than we deserved. The house on Willow Creek Lane is for sale. None of us can bear to live there. The gardens, your gardens, are the only part of it that still feel honest. I walk through them sometimes. They're as beautiful as ever. They remind me of the goodness we pushed away. I hope you are well. I hope you are happy. You taught us a lesson, Clara. Not about revenge, but about strength. I suspect it was a lesson we sorely needed to learn. Sincerely, Margaret." I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it on the table beside me. There was no surge of anger, no flush of victory. There was only a quiet sense of an ending, a final closing of a painful chapter. The words were a fragile bridge, not one I felt compelled to cross, but one I could acknowledge from a safe and peaceful distance. They had learned a lesson, she said. Perhaps I had too. The most important one of all. I learned that true strength isn't about being impervious to pain, but about how you tend to your wounds. I learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the sacred ground of your own well-being. I learned that self-respect is a garden you must cultivate daily, watering it with kindness and pulling the weeds of others' expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Dinner Friday? My place. I'll make that pasta you love." I smiled, texting back a confirmation. My life was smaller now and infinitely larger. It was filled with genuine friendship, meaningful work, and the quiet joy of watching things grow. The grand, manicured estate of my past had been traded for a wild, vibrant cottage garden of my own making. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the ocean, I picked up my trowel and returned to my roses. There was a particularly stubborn bit of thistle wrapped around the base of one of the stronger canes. Gently, methodically, I worked it loose, careful not to damage the healthy growth. I pulled it free, root and all, and tossed it onto the discard pile. The rosebush seemed to stand a little taller, its leaves catching the last of the evening light. The air was cool and clean. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, deeply at peace. I was home.